South Africans had hoped a presidential visit to the U.S. would offer a reset and a path to a trade deal. That seems all but impossible after an extraordinary Oval Office meeting today. President Donald Trump reiterated his claims that South Africa is persecuting white minority farmers. It put President Cyril Ramaphosa in a tough diplomatic spot. The CBC's Aaron Collins is tracking developments. He joins us live from our Washington bureau. So, Aaron, what happened?
But you got the word right there, the right adjective, Andrew. Just an absolutely extraordinary scene. So much to unpack here in this 60-minute meeting broadcast live that felt more like we were watching sort of a tense behind closed doors conversation between two heads of state, but on live television, interrupted by reporters. I can say, I think fairly, that this is probably not how South African President Cyril Ramaphosa wanted this meeting to go. I mean, Ramaphosa started by following what seems like a developing playbook for heads of state that are meeting with the U.S. president. So step one, keep it cordial. If you can, talk about golf. If you really can, bring some pro golfers with you. That's going to help. Complement the decor of the Oval Office, and then put your focus on trade if you can. That's the plan, but staying on track. It's just not easy with this president, right, Andrew? Things seemed to start out pretty well, but they shifted quickly after Trump got a question about accepting dozens of white South African refugees a little over a week ago from the press that were in the room.
You're taking people's land away
we have not.
From them. And those people, in many cases, are being executed. They're being executed. And they happen to be white, and most of them happen to be farmers. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough situation. I don't know how you explain that. How do you explain that? They're taking people's land away, and in many cases, those people are being executed. And in many cases, it's not the government that's doing it. It's people that kill them and then take their land, and nothing happens to them.
That's such an ignorant tone that Trump has taken on the South African thing. First off, he's got the president of South Africa in the Oval Office, and this is their meeting in front of the press with Trump coming off with the white, black folks over there and the issues that are going on in their country. And he needs to have a better historical understanding of South Africa before you start talking like that. If anything that he's insinuating existed over there, it'd be because those people want their shit back, that they have had their land stolen and they have to be occupied by an oppressor right there with them in their own land that's theirs historically. And he expects for us to forget about all of that and not understand that these black people in the majority is living in poverty. Somehow they ended apartheid, got a black president, and they still can't get anything. The black people are still living in poverty. The white people are still living on farmlands and as farmers and rich folk with a lot of opportunities and money and resources. And Trump is there complaining about something that is not coming to him from a credible source, to the president of a country who is sitting there telling you how it's really going down. And this is how Trump responds.
And just the look on President Ramaphosa's face as you hear Donald Trump repeating the justification for bringing those South Africans to the U.S. Accusations, as you heard there, that those farmers are being attacked and in some cases killed and their land often being confiscated.
And how did the South African delegation respond?
Well, I think, watching it, I think initially President Ramaphosa was hoping that this topic might just slide by. He could shift things back toward talk of trade, maybe bring this up behind closed doors, as would usually happen in a high-level meeting like this. But the president just wasn't having it, right? And that's when things got really off track. The White House then started playing, it was like a montage of news clips, sort of backing up the president's claims, apparently. And Trump had a handful of news clippings in his hand, too. So, I mean, the takeaway here, clearly, for me, this was planned, right? You don't have the montage.
Right. Trump was completely ready for this because It's a huge news story for you to be bringing folks in from South Africa because they're being murdered and their land being taken and the government not doing anything about it. That is what you've been telling us and what some people even believe, unfortunately. But then the guy is sitting there next to you, the president of South Africa, and he's telling you contrary to what you're saying. And you're not accepting his response. You're not listening to him like he's the president, and you're not giving him a fair chance for why he really came in the first place. He didn't come to talk about these Africanas who have been given special status to come into the United States. He came to talk about trade. There's trade issues going on in the world, and he needs to make sure that his country is going to be positioned in a place, and he's over to talk to you about it. Now, if South Africa shuts off all diplomatic and economic relationships with the United States and starts doing business with Russia and China exclusively and friends and allies of theirs, then we'll feel like we've been slighted or something. It just seems when we were living in a time when apartheid in South Africa was alive and well, the United States and South Africa didn't have any kind of issues or problems as long as they had the white country the white government over there representing that country. But when apartheid ended and the black majority took over the government, but they still are living in poverty. They still lack opportunities. They are still being held in captivity in their own land. That's what it is. When you can't move freely about and have opportunities that other people have come into your land and taken, then you don't have any of that. And I just can't imagine why Donald Trump can't understand or look across from where he's sitting and see another head of a country, another person who deserves respect and understanding and an opportunity to speak and for what they say to be understood and listened to factually, and not to continue to overtalk this man and insist that prior to talking to the president of the country, you just up and got these people into America and fast track them to citizenship without prior talking to the president of that country, without saying, well, we need to talk, man. What's going on over there? We got a good relationship. We consider you an ally. What's going on? But when it goes down where you're doing things without talking to the president, and there's such hot topics, racial topics, with the history of that country, with the history of this country, and that's the response we get. I think that's horrible response.
Ready to play and the news clips printed out if you weren't planning to do this on camera for a live audience. And you could see President Ramaphosa sort of begin to firm up a little, firmly but patiently start pushing back, explaining that, yes, some white South Africans are victims of violence in that country, but so are many, many, many black South Africans that are in the same boat or feeling this same kind of impact.
But they're not. And it's a shame to have to soften your voice and soften your position to the point where you almost have to sit next to this guy and lie about how equally oppressive and how equally brutal and how equally murderous and all of those things. It isn't. Even though there will be white South Afrikaners who will be murdered by some of the black natives of that land, but it goes both back and forth both ways. But when you're in a land being oppressed that is your native land, how do you justify that? How do you explain that? And when it isn't to the point of these folks just being massacred and their land being taken, and the government who is sitting next to Donald Trump, the president, letting you know we are not taking land legally back from these people. If any of those instances happen, that has nothing to do with the government of South Africa. And for Trump to intervene the way he has is very inappropriate. And for him to conduct himself in this meeting is very, very inappropriate. And it's a bad look for the United States. And a lot of us are pushing how inappropriate he is as a president. And it's because he doesn't have the decorum, and he does wear his racism right out on his sleeve, and he doesn't see the wrong in it because it's always been okay and accepted in the way that we do business over here in the United States. So some of the things that he's saying out loud might seem a little harsh or a little brash to some, but in this grand scheme of things, that's pretty much the way the United States feels and deals with other countries when it comes to white people being threatened, harmed, killed, or any of that kind of stuff. The response is so much different than it would be if it was another group of people in that position. And that's what Donald Trump is going to have to work on, and that's what the United States is going to have to work on.
Honestly, though, Andrew, to me, it wasn't until one of the professional golfers and the wealthy businessmen in the room sort of spoke up.
The white people. Once the white people began to speak, Donald Trump began to turn his head sideways like a Labrador retriever, like he's getting it, like, oh. But this man is sitting there and in detail telling you the same thing, but for some reason, it hit a different part of the brain. But it didn't hit that part of the brain that's going to make him rescind what he's done and fix it and be more open and fair in his own country and when dealing with other countries that have serious racial issues like South Africa.
From the delegation that you could see Trump beginning to listen a little bit.
And I know there's a lot of anger, through the transition. There was also a lot of stuff happening in the apartheid days. We grew up in the apartheid era. But I don't think two wrongs makes a right,
Yeah, when you make a wrong and then somebody else makes a wrong, you can always say, oh, two wrongs don't make a right. We did bad, but you don't have to do bad to get. That's not going to be the answer. Of course it's not. But they need to really, since apartheid has officially ended in like 1989 or 1990, right around then, they need to really live up to that. You don't just end apartheid, but 90% of the black people still live in messed up little, I forget what they call those darn areas they live in, but it just looks like plywood covered with tarps. It looks like houses that a whole lot of architecture or decent building materials were involved. And they just threw those places together and they got those people living on top of each other. And then you just go right across, maybe not even 2 or 3 miles from where they are to where the Afrikaners live. And they have yards and swimming pools and businesses and a different type of a community than what they got going on in the black area. Now, this is a place where apartheid ended. Is everyone aware that when my idea and understanding would be when apartheid ends, so does the policies and the everyday to day living. It's more than just saying we're an apartheid country and, oh, we're not anymore. It's living up to it. And I don't think South Africa has lived up to not being an apartheid. They say it, but they're still walking that walk. And Donald Trump is reinforcing that kind of stuff. He would embolden the Afrikaners over there who are resistant and who do feel that they still want to stamp these people out and continue to pull the resources out of the land and basically take back over the government if they could. Some of those folks over there from the white Afrikaner side are not satisfied with the ending of apartheid. They don't agree with it. They don't like it, and it didn't benefit them. And Donald Trump needs to stand on the side of right and on the side of where humanity would be, because it's consequential for him as the United States president to sit in the office and and ha and shuck and jive about this guy who is sitting there trying to directly tell you to your face what the issue is and that a mistake was made, and it might just be your interpretation of what's going on. But when you're not even willing to listen and let him explain it to you in a clear way from the leader of that country, then come on, Trump. You're doing a bad job at representing us on that front. We need to know that you are going to respect the heads of these countries and not who his entourage and who he brought with him because they're white and he's not. Because that's what it's starting to look like in this meeting.
President Mandela, when he came out of prison for all that time, didn't come out with hatred.
We have too many deaths, but it's across the board. It's not only white farmers, it's across the board.
So I'm not saying that the professional golfer or the billionaire changed President Trump's mind, but it did appear to me that he sort of leaned in, he began to listen a little bit.
Yeah, he did. He started paying attention. He was kind of locked in. And that's cool, but it's just obvious that it's a reason that Trump behaves and acts that way. And it's so embedded in him and in so many people like him that they don't even notice it. They think that's a natural response, and it's not. It's an unnatural response, because you would recognize who you're sitting next to and the words that were coming out of his mouth when he was talking to you, and it fell on deaf ears, or as if it didn't sink in, or he was speaking another language. And these other people are there speaking along the same terms as him, and it just seems like it's falling on Trump a little different. It's hitting a little different there, and that's horrible.
More. So just, so much to unpack today. A truly extraordinary scene at the White House.
This is a live view of the White House. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to leave the White House shortly. A short time ago, U.S. President Donald Trump held a tense meeting with him in the Oval Office. Trump confronted the South African leader, repeating his claims that white farmers are the victims of a genocide in South Africa. The visiting president is looking to reset the relationship with the U.S. Let's go to Johannesburg, South Africa for reaction. I'm joined by Lerato Lebele, a former BBC presenter. Lerato, what do you make of President Trump using this event to make...
Well, the United States government is taking the side of the Afrikaners without talking to the South African government. So is there a relationship between the United States and South Africa, or the United States and the Afrikaners? Because that needs to be clearly defined, and Trump needs to move ahead accordingly. You cannot take these people's word. Of course they're going to be biased. They feel threatened. They feel like they're going to be killed, have their land taken, and with good reason. But is it truly what's happening? Is the government over there providing support and protection and not legally taking people's land away from them that they stole, I might add?
These claims of mass killings of white farmers.
Well, for South Africans, it's very concerning because albeit South Africa's got a very serious crime problem. They say that the murder rate in South Africa is often higher than what you see in a war zone. But these crimes affect mainly Black and poor South Africans. So there isn't...
Yeah, that's the quick part we need to key on. The people being affected and harmed the most, and who have been harmed and affected the most, are the native South Africans, the folks whose land that is, by natural rights. And Donald Trump is coming in and trying to make up, down, and down, up. And even when you go to the point of recognizing the black government, the black president, and all of those things for who they are, and you still go past that and beyond that to cater to the Afrikaners. And basically, you're sitting right next to that man and disrespecting him by saying that his country is allowing or complicit to that kind of behavior. That's just what it is.
Any kind of concerted effort to exterminate a particular group of people, particularly white farmers. Certainly the statistics don't back it up. And when we have seen instances of violence on South African farms, in the 2020 figures, it said that only 49 farm murders occurred in that year alone. So you can't really call that an extermination. One life lost is one life too many. We accept that, but it is not a concerted attack against white people or white farmers in particular. And while South Africa does have a crime and violence problem, it disproportionately impacts the poor, the unemployed, women in the case of GBV, and black men. So the narrative...
Yeah, so really, if Trump is going to extend refugee status, it should be to those groups and not the white Afrikaners who are living a privileged life. And some of them, unfortunately, are having violence committed against them. And that's because of the system that they live in and the way that country's history has gone and the way the living conditions of those people every day. It's a volatile situation. What Trump has done doesn't help, but I'm sure the United States could come back with a better approach and be more instrumental in trying to help that situation and that system that they got going over there, and learn from it and bring some of that information back here and see if we can help ourselves here in the United States.
Narrative that's been peddled in the United States is grossly inaccurate, and it's not really favorable for South Africa's image internationally. And I think South Africans are just asking themselves the question, why does Secretary of State Rubio and his team, why do they insist on peddling this narrative? What is this insistence on driving or creating a particular picture or image of South Africa? And why are they married to the disinformation campaign?
Yeah, that'd be frustrating as hell if somebody, if the president of the United States was going around and speaking negatively about your country, and you guys are on like baby legs. You're still getting it going and trying to really run that government the way it should be run by the seated president, but you have resistance from the Afrikaners because a lot of those guys obviously have more power than the president when it comes to information and their requests and concerns being addressed. That would be not the correct posture for the United States to take. They have got to give their president his respect and not be accentuating this racist thing by taking a side. And making it very clear why you did it. Because I don't think Trump stuttered when he said the white farmers, he's point blank saying, making a distinction. He's not saying any South Africans who are having an issue with their life being threatened or feeling unsafe can come to the United States under refugee status. No, he's saying white Afrikaners. So if a black person who lives in South Africa who has had a certain amount of death in their particular area, they can't apply for that same refugee status. And they can be feeling the same fear for their life that those white Afrikaners are. And it's unfortunate Trump couldn't look a little deeper and come up with a more balanced answer, or to just stay out of it unless the president called on the United States to assist. Because right now we just need to be talking to South Africa about trade, and that's it. Getting that trade thing figured out, because that was and is the purpose of his visit.
Any ways in which to criticize South Africa. It's not a perfect country, but to really insist on a narrative that's based on falsities, it's very disconcerting, and South Africans are asking themselves why.
And Lorato, it's not just Secretary Rubio. I mean, it was the president of the United States sitting there with the president of South Africa, very focused, very kind of going on and on about this, as you say, pushing these assertions. And it seemed to be something that he wanted to speak about at great length. I mean, what was that like to watch?
Yeah. Very, very uncomfortable. And it almost felt like a Zelensky 2.0, where 2 months ago we saw a similar kind of dressing down of the Ukrainian president.
Yeah, but Ukraine has been getting billions and billions and billions of dollars from the United States and military support. And we're mediator between the conflict between them and Russia. It's a whole different story for a gentleman to come to the White House as a representative of South Africa, as the president, representing his country, to hash out these talks about trade. Trade is the issue. And for it to be overshadowed with these Afrikaners' requests to be made safe in the United States is wrong. That should have been taken care of between Marco Rubio and his folks and a delegation from South Africa, and not overshadow what needs to be talked about today. That's what the purpose of this visit was.
by the American president and his vice president, J.D. Vance. So it felt very much like an ambush. That's certainly how the media is reporting on it, and it felt very disrespectful. The president of South Africa, at the invitation of the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, had gone to America to try to thaw out, reset what he says are frosty relations between the two countries, largely because South Africans believe, because South Africa has taken a pretty direct and moral stand on the situation between Gaza and Israel's offensive in Gaza. It was South Africa that really launched the very first case at the ICJ at The Hague. So there's often a sense that because America is a very strong ally of Israel, perhaps this is a pushback of some sort. But South Africa has always insisted that its position in world affairs is non-aligned. They retain the sovereign right to have relationships with whomever they deem fit. They insist that the foreign policy is predicated on a world that is based on equity and mutual respect. And they will call out countries that they believe violate international norms, principles, and Geneva Conventions.
Yeah, that sounds all good and all. But what South Africa is going to have to do is just, I don't think that the president was too mild, personally. I believe you're sitting down next to the president of the United States and you are coming there it being respectful and expecting to talk about trade and hash those things out. And Donald Trump kind of kneecapped him by going in on this white Africana. That is not the priority, and that should not have been the crux of their meeting at all. And the news cameras in the United States, of course, they like sensational shit and racist shit. So they obviously are going to ask those questions and off-track the meeting. And then later say how bad the meeting went and that they didn't accomplish anything on trade. When between Trump and the media, how could you? I really believe that the president of South Africa was poised to have a meeting and try to move the trade differences ahead, figure it out, see what Trump wants or don't want, whatever. But South Africa does have the opportunity to talk to other countries if the United States is going to be that disrespectful, because that's all it is just straight disrespectful and racist. It doesn't get much more racist than that when you're over talking a president who is telling you about his country. He's not telling you, what you want to hear. He's telling you what you need to hear. He's telling you the facts. And then when part of his delegation, who happens to be white, Trump's head turns differently. Trump's ears perk up and he starts to listen and look a little more reasonable. But it's unfortunate it got to go to that. I'm really disgusted at just open racism like that. And that's what it is. I can't say anything else about it. That's just about as open as you can be to sit next to another leader of a country and act that way. When he was sitting next to Zelensky, and I don't like them to draw the comparison, because whatever he feels towards Zelensky is not racist. He don't hate him because he's black. He's not treating his country bad because they're filled up with a whole bunch of black people. That's not why. The issue is the United Nations and Russia and the border over there that is being contested, and the comfort of Russia in that region of the world, and the UN trying to get the United States to act like they used to, and not be so middle of the road and not supporting a country who could potentially become a part of the UN, which is what this is all about. So comparing that to this is no. The situation with the Afrikaners needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed between those two presidents. But the meeting out and abroad and the questions that were being fielded about that too much just overshadowed the reason they were here and took so much away from the meeting.
But if this is a backlash, it's gone very, very far, and it manifested itself in an intent to humiliate the South African leadership. If that wasn't the intent of the American government, but to really showcase a problem that a segment of the South African population says exists, Well, we can talk about the problems of South Africa in its racial polarities because they are historical problems, but not on the basis of misinformation and lies and statistical inaccuracies as
Yeah, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. He can't be getting up there and giving half-baked ideas and videos that someone put together, PowerPoints or whatever the heck he's doing, and trying to skew the public's opinion. And it's not hard to get a bunch of white people in the United States to support that. They don't want to see rich white people in South Africa being killed by these black people who are trying to take their land. That's exactly what the narrative is, and Donald Trump should do everything in his power to not push that.
well. And I think this is very concerning for the South African government and for the South African people, and it was uncomfortable to watch.
And how, I mean, I know it just happened, but how did you talked about how the media and how the people in South Africa saw this? How do people feel as though the president of South Africa handled himself in the face of this?
Yeah. Okay, so there's two sides. There's a school of thought that says the president handled himself with the requisite restraint and diplomacy and humility. And then other people say he was very soft. He should have gone hard to correct the myths, the misinformation, to fix the lies. So
He's sitting next to Donald Trump. I think he did about as good as anyone could have expected anyone to do. Because if you're going to sit there and be as aggressive in making your point as Donald Trump is being, it's going to break down real quick. So in order to keep the meeting going and to have at least the feeling of positivity when you leave, you have to kind of bite your tongue a little bit in that regard, because Trump has already made a move. He's already brought these people into the country, which means everything that president is saying is falling on deaf ears. He's not listening to that. And he didn't pick up the phone and call the guy to say, hey, what the heck is going on over there? And hear what this man is saying right now 3 months ago. And we wouldn't be talking about this right now. We would be talking about what the pressing matter, which is trade, which is the trade between South Africa and the United States, and what they can come up with and how this is going to go going forward. And it doesn't look like trade was touched on enough. So here we are. Hopefully behind the scenes, they're really hashing it out and working at it. And in the next few days, we'll hear that South Africa and the United States has come to some kind of agreement that makes sense. And hopefully will help make whatever recession we go into a little lighter. Because it doesn't look good right now, financially, economically, for the United States.
I think it depends on which side of the pendulum you sit. But the president did stress, especially when the videos were produced of Julius Malema, that Julius Malema, albeit he's a very popular figure in South Africa and he's a populist politician, he is a member of the opposition and not even an official or the leader of the official opposition. His party only garnered 9% of the votes in the general elections last year. So 9% is hardly representative of the voting public in South Africa. And
yeah, that's one of those spokesmen, leaders of a faction who is a little more radical than this president, obviously. You probably wouldn't win a whole lot of the vote if you felt like what most black South Africans feel. That would be that fringe folks, but they're the fringe majority, if that makes any sense. A lot of those people cannot stand to drive or look at the communities that the white Afrikaners are living in. I mean, if apartheid is gone, why hasn't everything started to balance out a little better? Why are the black people still living in these boarded up, handmade shacks? And South Africaners have all these wonderful amenities and homes. I mean, that kind of stuff in itself is like, if you just stand back and look at that and you don't see the racism in it, and then when there is a little bit of racism going the other direction and that's your response, what kind of message are you sending out, Donald Trump?
So to use the views of a minority opposition leader and say it represents government policy in South Africa is woefully inaccurate. But the president could have gone further than that, than just to say Julius Malema doesn't speak for all South Africans. He's not a member of the government in South Africa. He's a member of parliament. Yes, he participates in the democracy, but he's not a policy maker. And then I think he could have gone further to demonstrate with his delegation that South Africa is still dealing with a lot of legacy issues born of apartheid, which, as you know, is a historical program of racial segregation in the country. And 30 years into democracy, it's been really difficult to create a kind of social cohesion in South Africa. Yes, there have been great strides, but you still see so many of those historical structural inequalities manifest in the country. There's a huge inequality gap in South Africa. I think we've got one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world. And so if you look at the picture of South Africa superficially, the rich continue to be white South Africans with that historical privilege. The poor continue to be black South Africans who are agitated and anxious and want to see real material change. It's hard to execute that real material change in a country whose economy can't even grow at 1% per annum. And with globalization and global inflation and all of those kinds of issues adding to the complexity of the South African economy. And so to bring South Africans together, it's hard at a material level, but it doesn't mean that South Africans are living here constantly at loggerheads in hatred and killing one another. That is inaccurate. It is misinformation. It is disinformation. Even the statistics on violence and crime don't bear it up.
And it makes it so much harder for the blacks and the white Afrikaners over there who have come to a way of living that, for the most part, is comfortable for them all. Not fair, but comfortable. So a lot of people think that's okay. Hey, everybody's getting along, everything. No, it needs to be right, for sure. Those black people over there need to be getting direct benefits from some of the resources that are being pulled out of the land over there, and not for that all to be going to the owners of these corporations who are South Afrikaners. That just ain't right. And if it was the other way around, everyone would be able to see it, because it would be black people oppressing whites. And we need to find the parts of the world where black people oppress white people and how we deal with that. And as soon as you find some, let me know. Because it doesn't exist, because that's how this world operates. And Donald Trump is doubling down on it and not trying to fix it and correct it and walk us into a place that makes more sense globally. Because the United States should be a leader when it comes to human rights. And that is a terrible look. A terrible look. And the president of the United States should be ashamed of himself for behaving that way.
And to insist that that's what's happening in a country that is really trying to grapple with a whole lot of other social issues around job creation, poverty, and inequality, and to racialize it, it is disingenuous. It's disrespectful, and really and truly it.
And it's Donald Trump. That's just how he rolls. He does some things that end up good when it shouldn't, and he do some things that end up bad when it shouldn't. He just all over the place. He's inconsistent, and he can't lead with racism. He cannot interject, and he has been accused of interjecting a lot of racism into the United States politics, I guess you could say. And I don't think that it's Donald Trump as much as it just is the way we are here as a country. He's a little more outspoken. He speaks out loud about a lot of this stuff that some people won't. And a lot of times you can get marked as a racist or marked as being, and I'm not defending him as far as him being a racist. I'm just saying I don't like when we act like if we get rid of Donald Trump, the racism's going to go away. And the racism was there before Donald Trump was in politics. The racism that Donald Trump has been involved in business, he's not alone. The Trump family ain't alone. That's how it operates on such a larger level. And if we accept those facts and deal with them appropriately, then we can do better. But if we keep pretending it's just one bad actor or just a couple of bad guys, and then when they go away and we still see the oppression, we still see the unfairness and the uneven treatment. And it's not just in the United States. It is really, truly is global. But our problem here in the United States is that as leaders, we are leading like so inconsistently and under such false pretenses for our president to not be able to with common sense, figure out what would be the best approach to what he looked at as a crisis going on in South Africa. What would have been the best, and what he chose wasn't the best approach.
Doesn't do all South Africans, black, white, and Indian, any favor, because South Africans believe in the country that this is and want to see it work. But that's not for me to say. The president and his delegation needed to articulate that strongly as a rebuttal, because the comments that President Trump presented are true comments. They've been made by Julius Malema. In fact, Julius Malema even found himself in court recently over some of his utterances as to whether or not some of the things he says, is it hate speech or not? The court said no, it's freedom of expression, contentious, but it's not unconstitutional and against the law. But politicians could be doing a lot to sing from the same hymn sheet to bring this rainbow nation together the way Nelson Mandela had wanted to do. And the president of South Africa had to articulate that.
Lerato, thank you very much. Appreciate your...
I often wonder if when apartheid ended and the majority government, the majority black government took over, the basically the native people, and what if they had decided through their majority, by having the amount of numbers that they got and it being a democracy, that they wanted to expel all the Afrikaners from the country, all of them, just wanted them out? Would that be racism? Would that be a bad thing? That's not what they've done. That wasn't the answer to what has happened to them and their land and their resources in their country. And when anything flares up, they still get looked at as bad people, and they are tolerating that oppression and abuse without going like ham, completely nuts. And in a lot of cases, in a lot of people's mind, justifiably, they'd be justifiable to say, we want you out of our country. Get out. And these are the descendants of the Afrikaners who enslaved, oppressed, apartheid their ancestors. And I think they deserve to be commended for handling it as well as they do, and with such elegance and grace, and they look like strong people. And even when this gentleman is using his diplomatic abilities to sit there next to Trump and tolerate this meeting, he still gets criticized for not being strong enough or being too strong, or, it's never going to be right. There's no right answer for these people in a lot of ways. And that's too bad. The United States has to change before we can start trying to enact change around the world. I think that's very hypocritical, and we should be hands off on that, especially in that particular instance, because it's so similar to our own. Well, folks, like, comment, share, and please subscribe. And I'll see you on the next Black Popcorn.